So as we talk about chaos and as we talk about the last few years that we're coming out of, those felt a little chaotic. Um, I work with parents. That's my focus. And I think some parents are reflecting on that time during COVID and thinking about like, what were the things that were a blessing to us? Like, were we able to slow down and have a chance to think about what is life-giving? Do I want my life to be as busy as it was? Do I want everything to be just everyone's overscheduled and always stimulated by something?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when I think about chaos, that like as we're entering, maybe COVID is a little bit behind us. Um, what are those things we want to bring with us? Do we
Yeah.
want to enter back into the busyness?
Yes. Yes. Leslie, that was so when the pandemic started in 2020, my practice literally blew up. Like it was like wildfire trying to, sorry about my lights in the back. It was like wildfire trying to, hold space for all of the clients
Yeah.
because to your point, everyone started seeking out this very practice of stillness.
Mhm.
And how do we now navigate life without all of these stimulants, to
Yeah.
your point?
Yeah.
Um, I can tell you 8 out of 10 of my clients in the height of the pandemic sought me out because they didn't understand how to do life
Mhm.
without things, without, you
Right.
know,
Distractions. Like
distraction.
we almost can be addicted to these external things in our life giving us value, that when we slow down, we start asking those questions like, what makes me valuable and what is the meaning, when we aren't just doing
Yeah.
and
What is
achieving.
my purpose, Yeah. That is exactly what my clients were, the bulk of my clients were experiencing during that time.
Mhm,
Which is what makes the practice of mindfulness so beautiful,
mhm.
because it teaches you to not just become aware of the present moment, but to be able to sit in whatever's happening in the moment, whether it's this overstimulation that you may feel in your body or this ambiguous, where do I go next from here, feeling that you may feel because you don't have what you think may be a purpose.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it becomes it became quite interesting to see the impact of individuals having to step away from their normal lives to create this new normal, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And when I think about parenting, so much of what our kids go through, they're now in school and in sports and in social circles that there is a lot of pressure and performance and stress. And
Yes.
so, what does that look like to still? I mean, part of it is we're still functioning, and this is just part of our culture. We can't escape it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, how do we? That's what I find so interesting about mindfulness is that it teaches us to still remain connected to people, still remain focused on our goals, what we're working towards without like detaching from that. But
Yeah.
it gives us tools to be able to be ourselves while we're still doing those things.
Absolutely. I think of mindfulness as a way of shedding dead weight. A lot of times, to your point, because we're so busy, and especially parents, right? One of the things that I wanted to mention today is as parents, we tend to overschedule our kids. And so mindfulness teaches us to shed the dead weight of
Mhm,
overscheduling. The
mhm.
kids don't need all of these things. They don't need all of these activities. You don't need to be running yourself to all of these
Right.
activities, you know?
And that is something that is such a priority in my practice too, is helping parents understand like we can easily become addicted to all of these things that we're supposed to be doing. And it's real. We're trying to be responsible grown-ups. And at the same time, we have to also keep in mind what our children need. They need
Yes.
structure, they need nurture, they need connection, they need that downtime, the time to rest, so that all the things they're learning at school, all of the things they're experiencing, it has time for their brains to process that and for their bodies to take all of that in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, we live in a social media driven age. And so many of our kids don't even get a downtime, right? They go straight from virtual online school, some
Right.
of them, half of them, to cell phones in the afternoon.
Mhm.
Or you may be in school, they may be going to class, but you're still learning on a computer, right? To again, when you get out of school, as a parent, you may not have as much time for them. So you still put them on a tablet
Mhm.
or a video game or, something like that. And so, again, there's a lot that comes with even that space,
Yep.
that's really, really instrumental in um, our children's influences, um, there's a lot of expectation and judgment and comparison in
Mhm.
these spaces. And so again, as a child with an undeveloped brain, all you see is that I need this, or I have to be doing this, so I have to, again, going back to that need to keep moving, keep doing, keep showing up.
Right.
I teach parents and clients, period, in general, that we are human beings, not human doings.
Mhm.
And you have to model that for your children. Otherwise, they're just going to be human doings. They're
Right.
going to grow into little human doings.
And that's so important for our children to learn who they are internally,
Yes.
not just externally,
Yes.
like through the things they're doing or what people are saying or what they look like or the feedback they're getting on social media. And that is 100% our job as adults and parents in their lives, to teach them that, model that, even provide boundaries and safety around that. And so, what do you feel like are some of those issues or concerns that you see for kids when maybe their lives are a little too chaotic, or they might benefit from some mindfulness practices?
Sure. So, I see a number of things, right? The first and main thing that I want to really highlight is this absence of self-awareness, this
Mhm.
absence of self-appreciation.
Mhm.
Um, oh, our children are finding themselves in a web of disconnect just from the expectations that they see from their peers online. And Leslie, we as adults can see this. Like, social media is a collection of experiences.
Mhm.
Um, they're not your everyday life. They're
Right.
not what people are living, period. And so what I'm seeing are our children basing their lives on these collections of experiences,
Mhm.
um, which lead to poor self-esteem,
Mhm.
which leads to stress, anxiety, and essentially depression,
Mhm.
um, suicidal ideation, um, bullying. There are so many things that come from um, being in these spaces that require you to show up and show up in a specific way,
Yeah.
right? Because our children aren't just able to scroll Instagram and not take anything from it. They are this is literally their world. This is what they
Right.
are growing up in.
Right.
And so going back to parents, we have to be intentional, you
Mhm.
know, about not just what our children are seeing in these spaces, but how much time are we allowing them, you
Right.
know, to immerse themselves. And you said something earlier that was really, really key. It's something that I talk about all the time. It's that as parents, we have to be intentional about not just modeling, but directing our children to do intentional actions. Go for a walk, read a
Mhm.
book, you know, um, meditate. I love meditation. There are so many other ways that we could take a step back from the driving forces, is what I call them, and give ourselves like a mental reset.
Yep.
Give our children a mental reset, you know?
Mhm. And
Right.
something like super simple that I do sometimes is when I'm driving to school, when I'm driving my kids to school,
Mm.
we turn off the music. There's no iPads. We don't have a car with a TV in it. And we like, to me, just being able to sit and for my kids to look out the window or for us to have an organic conversation,
Yes.
there's something so peaceful and calming about that,
Mm.
that it's like super simple, but I feel like it really sets us up to feel clear about our day that we're going to have. Like we don't
Mhm.
feel frantic and anxious when we're finally get to school and okay, now you have to go follow all those expectations.
Yeah.
But it's like a very easy way just to give my kids and myself a minute with no agenda.
Mm. That is that right there is the definition of mindfulness.
Mhm, mhm,
And I can imagine that even those moments in the morning are super impactful to the connection that you have with your kids too,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Like eh, parents don't often realize how truly influential these moments can be,
Mhm,
to
mhm.
how, you know, your children will go off and process things outside of you, you
Right,
know.
right.
um, to your point, if you were just, you know, allowing the kids to play on a iPad all the way up until they got to school in the morning, they would be stimulated,
Yep,
right? They're
yep.
sometimes even overstimulated before they even hit a teacher's door. And
Mhm.
now the teacher's having to manage all of these stimulated children, you
Right.
know, which is overwhelming for
Mhm.
one person or two people for that matter. Yeah.
And I think sometimes as parents, we're trying to distract our kids or we're trying to be like, hey, we've got to do all of this. So let's just get through it. And I think there is something important about teaching our kids at a young age. It's okay to be still. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to just be. And it might take some time for them to build that skill.
Absolutely.
My 2-year-old is not going to be able to sit there for very long. But when we're in the car, he starts singing or he starts pointing out the window at the different things he's seeing. And he's starting to learn how he connects to the world around him. We are the people in our kids' lives that have to provide that space for them.
Yes, yes, it is so essential. It is so if we don't do it, no one else, they're not gonna get it from anywhere else.
Mhm,
And one of the things that I encourage parents to do is start this early.
mhm.
Mindfulness, um, we tend to think of mindfulness as this act, right? That you have to be mindfulness is a lifestyle. It
Mhm.
is literally a way of being, a way of living, a way of doing. Um, and so again, going back to this idea that we are our first child, we are the first models for our children. We
Mhm.
can start these practices of mindfulness as newborns, you
Right.
know,
Right.
um, taking these moments to be silent, taking these moments to read to them, taking these moments to, you know, um, create a little bit of art or listen to intentional music or eat intentionally, you know. Um, there are so many mindful acts that we could practice, that draw us as well into the present moment,
Right.
which is something that we need as parents.
Absolutely. And thinking about the non-anxious mother or the non-anxious parent,
Yes.
how that provides the freedom for our kids to explore who they are and
Yeah.
explore what their identity is. I think about like the hardest part about parenting is working on myself. It's not just here's what you say to your child or here's the right thing to do in this situation. The hardest thing for me is like turning the mirror towards myself and saying, how am I responding to this? How am I handling my stress? Because our presence is what can create so much for our kids.
Absolutely.
And there's no shame in that. Like all of us are on our own journey trying to figure this out.
Yes.
And at the same time, when you talk about awareness, that's such a big part of parenting is being aware of like, what's my stuff? Where do I end and where does my child begin?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so mindfulness has a lot to do with boundaries and has a lot to do with personal responsibility. It's like all of that really goes together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. And you said something that was really, really key. The boundary piece, because again, as a parent, you don't really recognize how influential your lack of boundaries can be in your child. It doesn't just model for them poor boundaries, but they then adopt this, idea of poor boundaries. You may not even have the expectation for them to execute all of the things in a day, but watching you will surely rub something off on your children who are seeing it. It's the nonverbal communication that is truly a lasting impression on our little ones.
And I know the days that I'm not feeling great, like those are the days I do feel more stressed, or I feel like, oh, those are the days I might not have been the parent that I want to be. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, we're all human. That's going to happen. And thank goodness our kids don't need us to be perfect.
Oh,
And at the same time, I mean, it's such an important part of our family systems, of our relationships with our kids, is
absolutely.
what is within my control and what is not within my control. And learning how to integrate mindfulness into who I am is going to affect my children.
You said something earlier that was super key, and that was that that you have to be intentional about the way that you're showing up and just being and just recognizing. And I think that that's something that as parents we struggle with a lot too, is showing the imperfection, showing the negative emotions, not wanting our kids to see us in these what we think are imperfect lights. And the reality is that one of the beautiful aspects of mindfulness is that we show up as ourselves so that our children are able to be themselves authentically, right?
Right.
There are a lot of children who hate being sad, who hate being angry. And it's like, but these are raw emotions. These are just as important as being happy, you know?
Yes.
Um, but that comes from, sometimes having parents who don't show sadness, who don't show anger, who, you know, stifle certain emotions so that, they can appear strong. And the reality is the strongest parents are those who are able to model all emotions.
Right. And in our culture around us, there is that toxic positivity message of if you're doing it right, then you're happy. Or like if you're a good mom, then your kids are happy. And that's a huge pressure parents are under to make sure their kids are happy. And I have to remind myself that's not the whole truth,
Mm.
that grieving and being sad and understanding we have limits. We're human. We can't control everything. And when you become a parent, you have to get very comfortable with negative emotions, because even as a parent, you're grieving things. You're grieving parts of yourself that are changing, and you're grieving the fact you can't control everything that happens in your child's life. So you have to be very comfortable with grief. And so being able to sit in that and normalize that for our kids is like a huge gift to give them.
Leslie, so huge. It is it is the gift that truly keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
when you think about our children being able to properly express their emotions as adults, like, it starts with us. It starts with us giving them that gift of modeling, with sharing and expressing. It's part of the reason why we have so many individuals who struggle when things get hard, right?
Yep.
And
It's tolerating that discomfort.
yes,
Is
tolerating discomfort.
That is a huge part of what I think is so helpful to teach children, is that discomfort isn't bad. It's not something we have to feel shame about, or something we have to get rid of, or like, as parents, we can be like, hey, don't cry, because that makes us feel uncomfortable. It makes us feel like, how do I fix this? Or what do I need to do to make this not happen? And that's actually an opportunity for us to connect with our children and to say, I can hold your negative emotions. I can walk with you through this. And then they feel more confident to handle that. Like, they can internalize, this is safe. This is okay. I'm going to get through it at some point, and then I can move on. And I think the other really cool part of that is that it then allows them to not judge other people for having negative emotions. They're able to like see people who they really are, and allow people to just be themselves, and they can connect to that.
Absolutely. 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 You find yourself being the catalyst for changing of a generation, right? Like, if you change your one child, and your one child is able to go into a classroom and model to Billy, it's going to be okay. You can cry, then Billy may be able to go home and tell his siblings it's okay to cry,
Right.
So yeah, it's so influential. It's so influential.
Yeah. And that's the sustainable value that we want to teach our kids. Like, that's because so much of what I see with kids and adolescents, and what parents are concerned about, suicide, burnout, anxiety, depression. I'm seeing a lot of young teenagers that are burnout.
Yes.
And so, rather than how do we fix this, like, we have to fix this once they're teenagers, these are the things we can think about earlier to say, how can we give them, like, this is what resilience is.
Yes.
It's not something that just every kid's born with. It's, we can model that for our kids. We can provide safety when they're experiencing different emotions, so that they can internalize that safety and then know, okay, when there's a stressor that happens, I have the confidence, and I understand what that feels like and what that looks like to walk through that.
Absolutely. 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 100%. As you were talking, I think, again, I go back to how many of my students are struggling with this acceptance piece. And it's the external validation that drives this struggle, right? And to your point, once we start to turn inward, once we learn this practice of turning inward, it helps to reduce a lot of this external validation.